So you recently bought this game when it was on sale, and you already played a couple of offline matches, but now you want to get into the online modes? Or maybe you have owned the game for years already and beaten a campaign or two, but never managed to jump into PvP. If that's the case, this video is for you. This guide is targeted at the players who already have a grasp of the game mechanics, but lack knowledge about the variety of units and how to fight against human opponents instead of bots. This is probably the hardest step in the wargame learning curve and the point where most give up. Making this step is never easy, but from my experience, the best starting point are low-income tactical matches. They allow you to focus on a very small group of units while observing other players at the same time. This video is supposed to make the start a little bit easier by bringing up a few key considerations and building some exemplary decks. So, what usually happens in a tactical? This map is called Mudfight, and it's arguably the most popular map for tacticals. And this specific map is split into two main areas where people usually fight. On the one hand, you have Foxtrot with very long lines of sight. So it's advisable that you bring a lot of tanks here, or bring tanks at least, preferably higher-end ones. And over here in Alpha, on the other hand, you have a lot of forests, which drastically reduce the line of sight. So here it is advisable to focus on infantry heavy combat. Usually you will have other players in different roles, such as artillery or anti-air, maybe airplane coverage. However, as a beginner, I would recommend you don't do this, as it won't really help you improve at the core game. Now, what is special or unique about tacticals? You obviously play on this 1v1 map, but you play a 10v10 with very little starting points and very low income during the game. So you will start with your CV, obviously, which you won't be able to delete, and the points that you have left over will usually be enough to get either one high-end unit or a small group of cheaper units. Therefore, every single unit you get is very, very precious, and you have to take every advantage you can get to make that unit last as long as possible and kill as much as possible. This is why you should always build your decks around the kind of unit you want to use primarily. So for example, if you know you want to play in Foxtrot, you want to bring a tank, which means you should build an armored deck around the tank you want to use primarily, so you get better veterancy for your tank units. Tacticals are arguably the only game mode where you can be a huge asset to your team, even though you're just filling one very specific role. Therefore, you cannot just afford to specialize, but you are required to do so. As a beginner, I recommend you have at least one armored deck and one infantry focused deck. As far as infantry focused decks go, you have multiple choices. All motorized, mechanized and marines give bonus XP to your infantry tab, which is the main reason you should do it. However, marine decks tend to be the least capable, as they lose a lot of very strong units, so the real competition is between motorized and mechanized. Which choice is superior usually comes down to the faction you're using. For example, Baltic Front has very strong motor units, whereas Entente has a very strong mech deck. I would however say that mechanized decks tend to be advantaged more in tacticals. Mechanized transports are either cheaper or more capable in combat than their motorized counterparts. The only advantage of motorized transports is their speed, and on small maps like Mudfight that advantage is reduced drastically. Last but not least, you have to pick a faction. Picking a faction unlocks their prototypes, which is really crucial, as the faction's prototypes tend to be among its best units, and as stated previously, you want to take every advantage you can get. If a single country, like in this case the UK, is also represented in a coalition, like for example Commonwealth, you should always go for the coalition, as choosing a coalition does not reduce any benefits you really need, so you still have access to the prototype units. If you would just pick the UK, you would get access to more cards in your decks and more units per card. But as we are playing tacticals, you're probably not gonna call out even half your deck. And the only reason you even specialize in the first place is to get those prototype units. This is more than enough. And so you have to access to all units of the UK, Canada, and ANZAC at once. For the same reason, you should never get any error restricted decks, as they only give you availability bonuses or activation point bonuses and no actual combat efficiency, while reducing the amount of strong units you have access to in your deck. So at first I'm gonna give you a template for an infantry focus deck, and what I mean by a template is that I will only fill in the crucial units you absolutely need, and I leave the rest empty so you can choose the units you want to try out maybe that are less important. So let's go. First off, logistics. You want a cheap CV. So this cheap is perfect, only 100 points. You want to save as many points as you possibly can, and 100 points is the cheapest CV you can get. It's not very survivable, but you should just leave it at the back, and then yeah, why waste any more points on something you don't actually need in combat. Another thing you definitely need is some sort of supply truck. The Alvis Stalwart is actually quite nice because it has 10 hit points for only 15 points. Which can be quite nice. If it gets shelled or something, it might survive, where a cheaper transport or another transport might not survive. So yeah, get a card of those. For tacticals, cheap supply trucks can be quite nice. More expensive ones are more supply efficient, but you usually don't need that much supply anyways. You can even consider taking a 10-point transport, because 5 points are actually a relevant difference sometimes. And yeah, so you can actually afford to just take both. You definitely don't need a fob in an infantry deck. If you don't play artillery or use a lot of helos, it's just a waste of 75 points. Speaking of helicopters, never use supply helicopters, they're very supply inefficient, especially on small maps, so in tacticals they are especially useless. And so let's get on with infantry, the most important tab. And here, as your main fighting infantry, you want to use Commandos 90. They are really strong against other infantry, as they have the Mini-Me, which is the strongest LMG in the game, and they also have a very strong primary weapon. Also important is that they have shock training and 10 strength, which is the perfect strength. 5 men are too weak, 15 men are usually cost inefficient. So you should always upbet your fighting infantry, and usually you have enough cards, but as this is your main fighting infantry, it actually might be the case that you need more than 8, but there's no problem, you can just take 2 cards. You could technically take 3 if you wanted to, but you will never use more than 16 commandos in a tactical game. Make sure you take this transport, as it has a heavy machine gun, so it's just straight up better than the other one. Now, as we have our main fighting infantry, they have only one weakness, which is their launcher. It's decent, but it's not amazing, and in forests you often fight against vehicles or tanks, and for that Commonwealth luckily has the Fusiliers 90, which, if you compare them here, they have 22 AP instead of 18 and 20 rounds per minute, which is amazing. Also 60% accuracy is really good, and only 15 points, so you definitely want those, and sprinkle them in between commandos so you can deal with pesky vehicles. Take them in the 5-pointer, so you get the whole package for just 20 points, 12 of them at veteran. It's a really solid choice. You might think the warriors could be cool, but believe me when I tell you, they are just underwhelming, so don't bother with them. If you want a nice IF3, Commonwealth has the TH495, which you can take with the Canadian Rifles. Canadian Rifles are nothing amazing, they're just regular line infantry, but they only cost 10 points, and you get this anyways just for the TH495, which is really nice. It has 3 front armor, medium optics, and obviously an autocannon. So it's a really solid pick. Now, something cool about mechanized or motorized decks is that you can easily afford to bring a manpads. And with Commonwealth, the decision is usually between the Javelin and the RBS 70. The RBS 70 has more range but less HE, and the team are 5 men instead of 2 men, but also cost 5 points more. You can actually just take both of them at veteran, and in the game you can decide what you want, which one. You have the slots available for it. Now, another really nice supporting unit that Commonwealth gets is the Eric's Launcher, which is amazing. It has a kilometer of range and 25 AP, so it's really nice to hold down towns, especially because it can also attack infantry with 2 HE power. They don't stand a chance against infantry at close quarters because they have no LMG and are only 5 men, so make sure that you support them with commandos. But it's a nice unit to have. And last but not least, you always need to have ATGMs and just take the most expensive ones you have. For Commonwealth it's the Milan 2, it's not an amazing one, but it's decent and only 20 points, 5 point transport. And you have a really solid, versatile infantry lineup with high veterancy. You should be able to deal with anything an enemy can throw at you. Now, in the support tab, there is only one must-have for an infantry-focused playstyle, and that's the mortar. In the case of Commonwealth, the British one actually is the best one because it gets the largest amount of ammunition. And here you have one exception: mortars you always want to downvet, and that is because you gain, or because you lose dispersion, so to speak. So you fire over a larger area, which is nice, as you use mortars for 2 reasons. For one, you can use it as fire support, obviously, like the conventional use is to attack enemy infantry with it, and you cover a larger area. Mortars won't kill any enemy infantry, but they will do morale damage, which can be crucial and give you the edge over the enemy. But also very important is the use of smoke. You can smoke off certain lines of sight for your enemy and prevent your infantry being shot at, for example, if you cross an open field or something. That's the same thing. If you have more dispersion, you cover a larger area with smoke. So it's a really nice thing. Now, all the other stuff you don't really need. Definitely don't get artillery. You can buy some AA systems if you want, but you should mainly rely on your manpads against helicopters, and dealing with planes is not your job if you play a mechanized deck. But I'll just leave it open for you. You can choose whatever you want. Same thing goes with tanks. You could take something like this cheap 10-point tank as fire support. It's a bit of a meme, but yeah, it's not amazing. Don't expect any wonders from it, but it's only 10 points. So maybe this is a possibility. You shouldn't focus on tanks as with the rest of it. Recon is really important. As an infantry focused deck, you should definitely have recon infantry. In the case of Commonwealth mechanized, the green jackets are awesome since they are 10-man shock trained, so they can fight alongside your frontline infantry and still put up a fight themselves. The only alternative you have is Nord Force, and they are 5-man regular without an LMG, so green jackets are definitely the best option. You could take 2 cards, maybe one in the cheap truck, which is not that great. It only has 50 kph off-road speed, but so you get it for only 25 points. And then you can decide whether you want to have a more expensive version in a very fast recon vehicle, which, fast for a tracked vehicle, 95 kph off-road is really strong. But it costs 15 points and doesn't have a lot of fighting capabilities. Or you could take them in the helicopter, so you can maybe move them behind enemy lines or something. I'm gonna go for the vehicle here. You could also, if you want to get Nord Force additionally, you can afford it, I don't know. Whatever you like. Actually, the 5-point tracked unit has better off-road speed than the truck, but the truck has much faster road speed, so up to you, I don't know. I'm gonna take this one. And you can feel free to use it up, fill it up with other units. Don't take exceptional ground optics vehicles. They are just not worth it. They're way too expensive for it to get out of it. Now, vehicles, there is one really important pick, and that's probably the last thing you really should take. That's the Centurion AVRE, as it has 8 HE power and decent front armor, so it's really nice to fight in forest and support your infantry. Don't let them fight on their own, but support them with other infantry, and they can swing the battle in your favor. Those already were all the units that you really should need to fight in an infantry focused area. You can fill up the deck with other stuff, like tanks or something, but 90% of the units you should call out are the ones that are in this deck already. So I'm going to leave this here, and you can fill it out with whatever else you want or feel like. So we're going to go for an armored deck. So we're going to choose armored type, and National Coalition deck. I'm going to go for Israel this time. In this case you have to take the singular nation, just because it's not available in any coalition. And so starting off, it's the same thing. Get the cheapest CV you can. In this case it costs you 110 points, but what can you do? Also, you want cheap supply trucks. Yeah, you don't have a lot of choice. You can bring the 40 pointer as well, but you usually don't have the points to bring that out. But the 15 points are really important, so you can repair your tanks or something. Now let's jump straight to tank tab. The first thing and your main focus should always be, if you focus on tank battles, is that you get the most expensive tank you can have, basically, because it's the one that's the most capable at defeating other tanks. Also, I would heavily recommend you upbet them. You're very unlikely to be able to buy more than one of these in a game. And just in case that you save up enough points, you might as well just get the second most expensive one as well, at a very high veterancy, or the highest one you can get. And from this point out, these are actually the important tanks. You could get something in the 90 point range as a kind of fire support tank. They can defeat vehicles really easily, and also very light tanks. You have the slots for most of the tanks in this list, and yeah, if you want to, you can put all of them in, basically. I'm gonna leave it here. You should really focus on keeping your tanks alive. That's kind of the... if you have 180 point units, you don't want to lose that. And to ensure that, you obviously have to fight well against other tanks, but your other main opponent are planes and helicopters with ATGMs, really strong ones. And so you once again want to get a cheap mortar, which you can use for smoke. It's much less about fire support this time, but that you can prevent the enemy from getting line of sight on your tank when they have helicopters or planes in the air, or even ATGMs or tanks on the ground. It's just so you can keep your tank safe. You can also get some AA systems. Make sure they're not too expensive, because you won't have a lot of points left if you start off with a 180 point tank. And you also have to get, at the very beginning, that's crucial, some recon infantry, which you can sneak into cover somewhere, and they can spot for your tanks, as your tanks will obviously have medium optics at best. And you want some very good optics, so you can actually shoot at targets at maximum range and yeah, make informed decisions. So once again, I'm gonna take 2 cards of those just because I can in different transports. They both have their advantages and disadvantages. You won't need 2 cards, it's actually. And yeah, once again, all of these cards are actually nice somewhat, so you might as well take all of them. They have their specific uses. They're not crucial. Crucial is really only recon infantry. You need that so your tanks can be successful. Also, as in any deck, you should always bring infantry. Tanks alone in forests are really, really vulnerable. Especially if you push somewhere, you want to make sure that you have infantry protecting your flanks. So first and foremost, you need some line infantry. And Israel has really nice Roviat 19, the Zelda. It's a solid choice, 15 points, that's all you need. Then, apart from that, just because you can, I would get some man pads, just because they're a cheap way to defend against helicopters. And yeah, the Zelda is the best infantry transport, or the 5-point you can get with as well. You can choose for what unit you want to use it. I don't know, I'm just going to use it for the man pads. You could also use it for the ATGM, which are always advisable to have, especially if you're trying to defend. They're really awesome. Now that I ran out of Zelda, I'm just going to take them in the Bordellas. But you can switch transports around however you like. I would recommend you get the Rawhide 90 in the Zelda, though. If you find yourself confronted with a lot of infantry, Israel happens to have the Messiahs, which have an automatic grenade launcher, which is really nice. So you might want to take those as well, because you're focused mainly against fighting against tanks. And just because they have it, the Merkava 2A is also really nice. It also has a grenade launcher, as you can see. It costs 90 points, but it's, yeah, nice unit to have. That's just my selection. The only thing you essentially need is the Rawhide 90. The Barkhan and the Dorban are a really, really smart idea. The last two are not really crucial anymore. And at this point, you actually already have the units you will call out in 90% of the cases. You definitely should bring some AA, maybe a cheap Hobbit, if you can afford an expensive Machbet. You can figure that out for yourself. It's not really as essential as the rest of this deck. So here you have your essentials: a super heavy tank and a backup for that, a supporting tank, and some infantry to protect the tank's flanks, mortars for smoke, and a recon to spot for the tanks. That's what you really need. Oh yeah, don't forget logistics, of course. Hope that at this point it has become clear how you should build your tactical decks. You should pick a type of unit on which you want to focus and build the deck in a way where you can maximize its combat capability. So, for example, if you come across a unit you like a lot or you want to try out, let's say the American Longbow, it's like a really strong unit, has 16 Hellfires, Fire and Forget, 26 IP, 70% accuracy, and exceptional optics, makes it a really strong package, but it costs 150 points. So it's obviously going to be your main unit in your deck. So what you do is you go create a deck, call it Longbow deck. It's USA, but you might as well go Norite because it has no real disadvantages. You still get your prototypes, which the Longbow is. And you might think you need an airborne deck because it gives bonus to helicopters, but actually you need to go for motorized, as the Longbow is in the recon tab and the motorized deck is the only deck that gives bonuses to recon units. So you start off in your usual way, get a cheap CV. You should actually have a fob in your deck just in case no one else leaves one behind, as the Hellfire missiles, Longbow fires, are really supply intensive. So in this case you should actually have at least the option to deploy one at the start. Also obviously get some cargo trucks. You can actually take the more supply efficient one as well, because you can afford it. And then you have the possibility to order the one you want. And then you obviously take your Longbow and upvet it, which is amazing. You have 70% accuracy plus another additional, or multiplied 32% accuracy, which makes it the strongest the Longbow could ever be in game. And then you fill out the rest of your deck with units you think could be nice in support of the Longbow. And yeah, but that actually is the Longbow template. It's really focused on this one unit. And then you can use, obviously your strengths are still in the infantry tab. So get a couple of nice infantry guys, or the recon tab. Norite has a really nice recon tab. Stuff like this Bradley is also amazing. Just experiment with it, and I'm sure you'll come up with a lot of very cool decks. Was not supposed to be a all-in-one guide for Wargame multiplayer. There are a variety of great guides and videos on gameplay mechanics and deck building. This was just supposed to be an introduction focused on tacticals, as this is a topic not that well covered, especially by decent players. I will put a bunch of guides and tutorials in the description, which you should at least take a look at if you're serious about learning this game. For one, there is Hon's guide on how to get started with Wargame, which is definitely the best introduction to the game mechanics. Secondly, you can find Turnix guide to unspec deck building. This won't help you build tactical decks, but it helps you to understand unit types and their roles, and it also might help you in the future for 1v1s or team games. Thirdly, I will link Rasman's series Wargame Red Dragon extensive tutorial and What Wargame Doesn't Tell You, which are a great introductory and advanced video tutorial series respectively. Lastly, I would like to recommend 3 channels. The first two, Rasman, who I already mentioned, and Firestarter. They are top level players and they upload regularly. Especially Rasman has a bunch of guides on his channel, among other coalition reviews, which can help you to get to know the different units. In case that you are not yet very comfortable with the game and these channels are a bit too in-depth for you, you can go check out Stealth17. He also uploads regularly and has made a ton of guides. He is a much worse player than the other two, which can both be good and bad. On the one hand, he tries to explain a lot of basic elements and he actually plays tacticals, but on the other hand, some of the things he says are just outright wrong. So I would definitely recommend that you start watching the other channels at some point as well, as Stealth could teach you some, just bad habits. One very important last note regarding old guides. This game was released on the 17th of April 2014, and the last patch was at the very end of 2016. In that period, a lot of things, especially balance, changed heavily. So if you watch or read an unupdated guide from 2016 or earlier, just take it with a pinch of salt. I hope this guide was somewhat helpful. If you have any specific questions or requests, let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them or potentially cover them in a future video.